Now, recently, Canon has launched a new camera. In fact, most makers has launched a new camera. Sony, Fuji has also launched new cameras. But today I'll talk about the R6II. And to me, the reason I want to talk about it is because when I first saw it, I thought that it was a mini R3 in every single way. And today's video, I just want to share with you what I think about the latest R6II launch, and really, is it truly a mini R3, and what's the difference? And at least based on the specification, is it something worth it? So the R6II is a 24 megapixel camera. It is the R6 continuation, so no top panel, no battery grip, dual SD card slots. It is a R6, but with a newer sensor, newer algorithms, same processor though. I believe it's still the Digix 10, but at least it has a newest sensor itself that shoots a whole lot quicker. And most importantly, when you shoot video, it really doesn't even overheat based on what I read online. So the R6II, firstly 24 megapixel, very close to its big brother, the R3. And it shoots 40 frames a second. That is 10 frames a second faster than the R3. But it only does it in electronic shutter mode. So what's happening there? Now, firstly, the R6II is not a stacked sensor camera. As such, you will not get the advantages of stacked sensor, which is very minimal loss of dynamic range in electronic shutter mode. And not only that, it also has very minimal rolling shutter. So the R6II, by not having a stacked sensor and just a CMOS doing the same thing, means that most likely it will have significant rolling shutter, or significantly more than the R3, and it will have significant loss of dynamic range. How much is the loss? I do not know, but you can take a look at this chart here for the R5. You can see the loss is quite huge from standard shutter to electronic shutter, and I assume that the R6II will have the same issue. Now, when it comes to rolling shutter, I think the differences are not that great between that and let's say the R3 in most circumstances, except if you are really panning very quickly and there are verticals behind you. I have seen videos that show the effects of the rolling shutter. I think it is acceptable in most ways, unless you're shooting like tennis or golf or anything that moves very quickly, like the bird. Like, you shoot hummingbird and the wings move very quickly. Yes, then the R3 is a significantly better camera because of the stacked sensor. Now, in terms of autofocus, I think there's almost no difference, or very minimal, because Canon has really polished it in the R7. R7 also uses a CMOS, and the R6 original one also uses a CMOS. It does autofocus, to me at least, not much different from the R3. The R3 is only better in certain circumstances and is very small, and probably an improvement in algorithm like the R6II may have solved all those problems. So my guess is that the R6II and the R3 will be very comparable when it comes to autofocus, except in extreme scenarios where the stacked sensor has the advantage of readout speed, which means that you're shooting very fast moving subjects. Next, when you talk about the body itself, the R6II is the R6 body, no top panel here, which I don't really care about. The panel is really not important. A lower resolution EVF and folding LCDs, I don't think that's a big deal either. And then it doesn't have the built-in grip. Obviously, that's not a big deal either. You can buy the grip if you want. And that being said, the most important part, the difference, is the CF Express slot and no CF Express slot on the R6II. That's a big deal because it actually affects the buffer significantly. Based on most videos I've seen, the R6II shoots about 90 to 110 frames in 12 frames a second mechanical. On the R3, it's infinite. As long as you have a CF Express slot, you can shoot till the CF Express slot is full. And even without the CF Express inside, the R3 can shoot 150 to I think 160, I remember, for 12 FPS. It means that the R3 has a deeper buffer, and with the CF Express, it can read out really quickly, and therefore you can shoot out really, really long. So that's the difference. If you are trigger happy, you want to burst, then the R6II still has a relatively limited buffer. But that's it. It's still 100 shots of buffer. And unless you are bursting electronic shutter, which is 40 shots, then you will just burn it away within 3 seconds. Well, then you should buy the R3 if you are that happy with it. Now, there is one special mode on the R6II that's not available on the R3, and that's the pre-burst mode. The pre-burst mode allows you to shoot constantly 40 frames a second in half-press mode. So when you're half-pressing, it's constantly bursting in electronic shutter. And when you do press down, it will take the last 20 frames, save it, and then continue bursting the rest. What it means is that when you are anticipating a subject and you press down finally, you will capture the few frames before the press itself. And that is important because we have a reaction time, and our reaction time is maybe about 100, 200 or 300 milliseconds depending on whether you have training or not. As such, that equates to easily 5 or even 10 frames before you even depress the shutter fully. And now you can finally recover those shots. So what you would have lost will be captured. What you would have lost with your reaction time. So great stuff, right? Now, there is also some other things that will greatly improve, such as the video function on the R6II, but it is no better than the R3. So if you're looking for a better video camera, the R6II is not a better video camera than the R3. The R3 does internal RAW, R6II does external RAW, and it shoots 4K 120, the R6II cannot. And not only that, it does 240 frames a second on the R3, and you can't do it on the R6II. Now, it may seem very unfair that I compare the R6II with the R3, but think about it. It shoots 40 frames a second, and in most cases, unless you're shooting very quick subjects, you don't really need to worry so much of rolling shutter. At least the R6II rolling shutter is pretty still okay. It's not the worst. Definitely not the best because stack sensors are better, but definitely not the worst. It's definitely better than the R6 and even better than the R5. So if you put all of that into perspective, the R3 in most day-to-day usage, you can use it like an R3. Just that don't be so trigger happy and don't pan so quickly and don't purposely shoot subjects that are moving so darn quick like a golf club or a hummingbird, and you'll be safe. How many of us actually do those things? I think really little. And as such, I think the R6II is really the perfect balance for high performance camera in a relatively compact body at a not so disgusting price. It is less than half the price of the R6. It is less than half the price of the R3. I believe it's priced at 3.6k Sing dollars. The R3 costs 8,000. So considering the price, considering its performance, great. I mean, the loss of resolution in the EVF LCDs are no big deal. As long as it still has 120 frames a second for the EVF, I think it's fine. Various other losses are not that big deal. My only personal take is the buffer and the electronic shutter capabilities of the stack sensor. So if you care about those things, then you have no choice. You only have the R3. But if you don't care about those things, the R6II definitely is the camera that I will choose, at least. I will recommend. So that's all really for today. I think the R6II is just such a fantastic piece of gear that Canon has launched. Canon has finally stopped using the cripple hammer on the cameras themselves. I mean, whatever limitation is in the R6II is purely physical limitations, which means that you cannot overcome it by patching a firmware. It has only 2 SD card slots, you can't make it read any quicker. The buffer is probably limited by the SD card plus the internal memory, so you can't shoot anymore. The fact that they allow you to shoot 40 frames a second on a camera cheaper than its flagship, I think it's a big deal. I think Canon has finally woken up and stopped using their cripple hammer and nerfed their cameras using firmware. It's disgusting. They finally did it, and the R6II seems to be what Canon will do, could do, if they don't just try to cripple their camera using software means. Well, so the question is, R3, who is it for now? Well, if you need a stack sensor, there's nothing to argue. If you don't want to shoot with a mechanical shutter, well, the R3 is still the best. If you want to shoot 6K 60 internally, it's still the best. You know, there are still many perks to own the R3, but now the amount of perks have just shrunk further, and maybe the R6II is the camera for most photographers in this world. That's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.